I got his levels up. He should be fine. But that person still feels like shit. What is that prescribing doctor missing?
The thing that they don't realize is because they're basically now putting a sports car engine into a piece of shit Swift that needs to be serviced, is that because that optimal testosterone level is not supposed to be there, it's not going to metabolize and be absorbed properly. If people are wanting to actually deliver the outcomes for their patients that makes them feel better, healthier, they have to look at every series of systems in the body, but not just individually, but how they're interconnected.
Dave Lee in the house, dude. I've been looking forward to this. I've been such a big fan of yours since the last Silverback Summit. But the thing that really got my attention when you were on stage last year was I never really heard anybody speak about, I guess I'll say like the peaks and valleys of testosterone for a man in regards to what else is going on in life, right? All we talk about is like, oh, TRT good, low TRT bad, or low testosterone bad. But we don't talk about like, well, also during that time, life is pretty easy, but why is your testosterone so freaking high? And then when life gets hard, your testosterone levels drop.
When I had my brain injury when I was in my mid-20s, it really caught me off guard. And one of the challenges that I realized in hindsight, looking back on it, was that I hadn't really been through anything difficult in my life before that had given me the skill and the resilience to be able to push through and overcome adversity. So it wasn't until I started testosterone treatment that I felt my mindset shift more towards, I want to take a swing at this and actually see if I can come back from this and recover. And I was very fortunate that I was able to, but it took so much more grit and determination than I even really thought I was capable of. And in the recent years since, anxiety and stress is one of, if not the most prevalent issues that men are complaining about. I think Jordan Peterson puts it best where he says, competence creates confidence. And this is one of the biggest struggles, is that when a man is going through his formative years, like I very strongly disagree that a man is an adult at 18. I think we become adults at 30. And I think the big challenge coming up for these younger guys is that they're at a point in their life where they haven't formed their identity, they haven't really mastered a skill, they haven't mastered themselves, but they're in a situation where their androgen levels are also that of a much older man. And I think this creates a lot of problems because it typically takes multiple decades for a man to be confident and resilient and able to express the best version of himself in life. And if everything's going well hormonally, that point that a man reaches that will be right when his testosterone level starts to drop off. And I think that that's something that is drastically overlooked. And that's why I like to say that, TRT takes time to work, but it also takes time to do the work. So yeah, that's what I've seen a lot of working with younger men. And that's why I get up on stage and teach these things, because these guys need to know that they're not alone. They're not defective. It's not because they're failures. It's because their machinery has not been functioning the way that it should to be able to fulfill the role that they need to fulfill in society. The one thing that I think is important is that if you are you and I am me, we are alone with our thoughts 24/7. We know if we are putting on a facade. We know if we keep our word to ourselves. We know if we're hitting snooze. We know if we're eating cheat meals when we shouldn't. All of these things, I think, can really weigh on people's conscience. It can be very difficult to lay your head down at night and go to sleep if you haven't achieved everything that you set out to achieve that day. And I think that's one of the most common causes of anxiety and insomnia is people are very self-critical, but they're self-critical because they know that they are objectively not living up to who they could be. The problem is that if the machinery is broken and defective, it's kind of like you're trying to be a race car driver in a faulty vehicle. And I think that can be very psychologically damaging over time because you're not developing the self-esteem, because you don't have that proof of success, that proof of actually being able to do what you want to do and what you want to achieve. So I think there are some good strategies to look at. I think firstly, people should really focus on mastering something. If someone is a welder or if someone's an electrician, if you are a phenomenal welder or electrician, if you walk into a room that has nothing to do with your trade, you're still going to exude and have more confidence because you know that as an individual, you have mastery of some area of skill that is valuable to society. So I think people should really focus on not trying to start multiple different things and be a jack of all trades, master of none, is find something that you like or something that allows you to earn a living that you don't hate and get really fucking good at it. Like, I can imagine that you doing what you do because you have the knowledge and the proof that you are an expert in your field. That confidence translates to when you're ordering at a restaurant or when you're going into a social interaction, because you have been able to move forward and succeed in a field that previously you were one day a beginner at, you didn't know anything about. So I think that's very important. The other thing that I really like, that I basically prescribe as a health coach, is I like people to practice mindfulness and I like people to practice martial arts. And this combination of experiential therapy, I think, is very valuable. And I don't recommend people get into sparring and actually fighting, because I work with brain injuries. That's not a good idea. But simulating violence with pad work and having a male mentor to take you outside your comfort zone. If you wake up in the morning and you get overwhelmed by opening your email inbox on a Monday morning and having a messy room and needing to do the basics, if that pushes your stress capacity, it's not because that's too hard, it's because you're too soft. And going and doing some form of martial arts, again, just pad work or just basic drills, once or twice a week gives you something that is far more acutely stressful than anything else you're doing, which reprograms your sensitivity to stress. It basically gives you better stress tolerance, because by association, all of those things are not stressful at all. They just require putting one foot in front of the other. And then when you're looking at mindfulness, you're basically learning to focus your attention on what you want to focus it on, which ultimately gives you the ability to do what you need to do and not what you want to do. And if you're able to do what you need to do, not what you want to do, for a prolonged period of time, this ultimately gives you the foundation to actually be disciplined. And if you lack the skill to actually have discipline in the first place, not only is your life going to become a chaotic mess as your responsibility goes up as you get older, but you're also going to feel very inadequate. You're going to feel like a failure because you're saying, I can't even do the basic things I need to do. And if you can have that balance of increasing your stress threshold and improving your ability to focus and take action on tasks, I think that leads to good outcome.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
People that are prescribing, where they're missing the mark when it comes to, like, well, he was at 200 nanograms per deciliter. We got him on 200 milligrams, and now he's at 1,200. I did my job. Maybe he's just not working out hard enough. Maybe he's not getting enough sleep, because I got his levels up. He should be fine, but that person still feels like shit. What is that prescribing doctor missing?
The problem is that they're looking at a very complex series of interconnected systems through a myopic lens. So testosterone is not the only thing that impacts how you feel and how you perform. It is a piece of the puzzle. And the problem is that it is difficult and it requires a very in-depth intrinsic understanding of human biology, which I think a lot of practitioners put in the too hard bucket. They get paid either way. They want to do the easiest job. They want to get home and they want to basically, call it a day. And I get that, people are people. But if people are wanting to actually deliver the outcomes for their patients that makes them subjectively feel better, but also are objectively healthier, they have to look at every series of systems in the body, but not just individually, but how they're interconnected, kind of like the engine of a car. So practitioners have to be doing comprehensive blood evaluations to test all systems in the body, all hormone markers, all comprehensive panels, and then they have to cross-reference this with the patient's lifestyle, the patient's psychology, the patient's goals, and basically see is there another biological parameter going on here that needs to be diagnosed, treated, and resolved? If that's not, and everything is smooth sailing, it can often be a psychological issue. And testosterone gives a man the foundation to repair his psychology, but it doesn't rebuild the psychology for him.
Are there any other measurables that we can track to whether it be prescribe something different, or maybe it's a blood marker that we can focus on, like, hey, when this is high and this is low, or whatever, like when this is out of whack, that means X, Y, Z, and we can approach it this way. Like, are there other measurables?
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of the time it's the combination of different blood values as well. So if I had to put it in a rough, this isn't prepared, so I don't quote it in exact order, but if I put it in a rough order of prevalence, insulin resistance is a big one. So, if fasting insulin and HbA1c are elevated, the patient has metabolic syndrome, which means that their body is not efficiently burning energy, which means that if you don't have enough X to do Y, this is the definition of stress. So if you're biologically stressed, you're not going to be performing mentally or physically well. The other ones to look at is liver disease. So if a patient is drinking alcohol or high volumes of alcohol in particular, they can develop something called non-alcoholic or alcoholic fatty liver disease, in this case, the former being from insulin resistance. And this can mess with the body's ability to detoxify, the body's ability to metabolize hormones properly. This is something that needs to be fixed and resolved. Hypothyroidism is also overlooked and undiagnosed. Deficiencies in pregnenolone and DHEA, they're less common, but they are more common in men who are older and in some younger men as well. All of these things are probably the most common markers that I see. Most men who want to go on TRT are not just trying to have a higher testosterone level on paper. That's not the goal. The goal typically is to feel more masculine. And then we have to ask the question, well, what is masculinity? What does that actually mean? To me, masculinity is the capacity and the execution of leadership. If we ask what is an alpha male, alpha means leader. The alpha of the pack is the leader. So then we go, well, what is leadership? Leadership is the ability to be resilient under stress and to lead. And when we look at what testosterone does biologically, this makes a lot of sense to me because it is an antagonist to a lot of the stress signaling in the brain and the body. It's anti-catabolic, meaning it prevents breakdown of muscle tissue as well as bone mineral density and organ systems. But it's also something that facilitates the proper neurotransmission of not just dopamine, which is motivation, pleasure, passion, drive, but it also facilitates the proper GABA signaling, which is the target neurotransmitter of things like Valium, Xanax, alcohol, sedatives, things like that. So I like to use the analogy of the Jaeger bomb. Everyone knows what a Jaeger bomb is, right? So and people shouldn't drink Jaeger bombs, but the reason why people do is that if you're out partying, you've got the caffeine and the sugar, and then you've got the alcohol. And together what that's doing is it's basically making you more driven and energized and, feeling kind of buzzed, but it's also acting as a social lubricant to be more calm, less anxious, and people like the feeling of this. Testosterone doesn't feel like a Jaeger bomb, but mechanistically, when we look at the combination of how testosterone and DHT works on neurotransmitters, by facilitating dopamine and GABA activity, this allows a man to be more motivated, driven, and passionate to push outside his comfort zone, but also being cool, calm, and collected under stress. That is the recipe for leadership. So if we look at what can men do to actually support this, and I just got back from Melbourne giving a lecture on this exact point, is you basically have to do all the things that you should be doing and stop doing all the things you shouldn't be doing. And that can be a difficult pill to swallow. When someone injects testosterone, it doesn't do anything until it binds to a receptor. So it's kind of like playing pinball on like a pinball table. You can have as many balls flying around the table as you want, but you don't get any points until it hits the bumpers, right? So hormones are like that. They don't actually do anything until they activate a receptor. What we have in the body is a variety of processes and regulatory mechanisms that change the receptor expression and availability of the androgen receptor, as well as things like estrogen receptors as well. So if someone is in a situation where they are making very little testosterone because their body is actively suppressing the production, not because the endocrine system is damaged, but because they are sick and inflamed and, living like a dickhead. If you take then the healthy amount of testosterone, that has no business being in the body. So the body is not primed from a metabolite enzyme perspective or from a receptor perspective to actually utilize those androgens properly. So what ends up happening is that not only does the hormone not work, but then it increases the conversion to estradiol, and then people also have an upregulated estrogen receptor expression due to inflammation. And a lot of this is driven by insulin resistance, as well as consumption of things like alcohol and other drugs, which can impair the liver's ability to properly metabolize these hormones. So what they end up with is a very different ratio of testosterone to DHT to estrogen due to the way that their body is working. But it's not because they are genetically an over-aromatizer or because something is broken. It's because the body is responding to how they are living. The people try to fix that with taking more drugs. And then now you're working even further against the body because all of these metabolite ratios are your body trying to protect itself. Mm-hmm. So, someone will be like, okay, well, I'll just take some anastrozole and block the estrogen. That'll fix the issue. That won't increase the DHT production, one. But now we're in a situation where that estrogen that's being produced is protective because the body is trying to protect itself. So now people will tend to they'll solve one problem, but they'll create two more. Mm. And the further you throw your body out of alignment, the work, because you're subjectively inhabiting this body, the worse or kind of suboptimal you're going to feel. The most important thing is to empower people to understand how to have a better relationship with their body and their mind, because we are driving this vehicle from the day that we're born to the day that we die. And the more that we can understand how to improve our subjective experience of being on this earth, the better quality of life we're going to live.
One of the biggest secrets that I come to in the later lectures, which I'll share now, is that the way to avoid side effects on TRT and the way to achieve what you're hoping to achieve is that you have to live in the way that you would be producing the amount of testosterone that you're injecting if your system was working properly. Personally, I would take a suboptimal protocol with optimal daily habits compared to a optimal TRT protocol and terrible daily habits.